Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about sex trafficking in the United States. Sex trafficking is the action or practice of illegally transporting people from one country or state to another for the purpose of sexual exploitation. According to the National Human Trafficking, sex trafficking is a form of modern day slavery which occurs when a trafficker uses force, fraud, or coercion to control another person for the purpose of engaging in commercial sex acts. Minors under the age of 18 engaging in commercial sex are considered to be victims of human trafficking. Regardless of the use of force, fraud, or coercion, as it was further noted, sex traffickers frequently target victims and then use violence, threats, lies, false promises, debt bondage, or other forms of control and manipulation to keep victims involved in the sex industry for their own profit. In addition, it is important to note and understand that sex trafficking exists within diverse sets of venues and businesses, including fake massage businesses, escort services, residential brothels, in public on city streets, and in truck stops, strip clubs, hostess clubs, hotels and motels, and elsewhere. According to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, the definition of trafficking consists of three core elements. The first element is the act of trafficking, which means the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons. The second element is means. The means of trafficking, which includes threats, overuse of force, deception, coercion, abuse of power, or position of vulnerability. The third element is purpose, the purpose of trafficking, which is always exploitation. Where does sex and human trafficking occur the most in the United States? There are reports of human trafficking and sex trafficking from all 50 states and Washington, D.C., as well as many U.S. territories each year. The states with the most frequent reports, according to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, are also the top 4 states based on population. These include Texas, Florida, New York, California. Most other states where human and sex trafficking is relatively more prevalent are also highly populated. This shows that supply and demand for human and sex trafficking victims may not vary drastically across the country. This is a worrying statistic because it demonstrates that this issue is not bound to just one culture, population, or geographical area. What population is at highest risk for being victims of sexual trafficking in the United States? Traffickers are known for recruiting and obtaining individuals who are already vulnerable, so they often target the most at-risk populations. They may include runaways, homeless young people, victims of other types of violence, foster home youth, unoccupied minors, those displaced because of natural disaster or other crisis, those who cannot speak English, undocumented individuals with no support system in the United States. The economic vulnerability and victimization. According to the Institute for Women's Policy Research, traffickers often target individuals who have previous experiences of psychological trauma, histories of family violence, or child sex abuse, drug dependency, homelessness, and social isolation. Individuals with limited economic resources, minors and individuals with limited educational opportunities, work opportunities, or family support are also at a heightened risk of trafficking. Traffickers exploit economic vulnerabilities through force, fraud, and coercion, luring victims with promises of work, shelter, food, and support. A study by the Polaris Project found that many victims turn to traffickers due to sustained unemployment, unpaid debt, and desperation to provide for themselves and their children. And down below, you can see a graph that describes traffickers find victims through social network, home neighborhood, clubs or bars, internet, school, and lure them through the promises of protection, love, adventure, home, and opportunity. So the causes of sex trafficking. The causes of human and or sex trafficking, while it is complicated. The causes of sex trafficking are complex and interlinked and include economic, social, and political factors. Poverty alone does not necessarily create vulnerability to trafficking, but when combined with other factors, these can lead to a higher risk for being trafficked. Some of those other factors include corruption, civil unrest, a weak government, lack of access to education or jobs, family disruption or dysfunction, lack of human rights, or economic disruptions. So, the effects of trafficking on survivors. Victims of sex trafficking often experience poor physical and mental health. Sex trafficking victims are at high risk of sexually transmitted infections, pregnancy, and unsafe abortions. Common physical health problems reported by victims of trafficking often include headaches, stomach pain, and back pain. Victims of trafficking also reported several common mental health problems such as depression, anxiety, post traumatic stress disorder, and other psychiatric conditions. Many victims also struggle with alcohol and drug addiction, either as a result of traffickers' control or as a coping mechanism, and need treatment programs to recover. It was further noted that obstacles to stable employment can interfere victims' long-term well-being and economic security. Moreover, delayed progress at school is also common among trafficking victims. In addition, lack of legal work experience leaves victims without a marketable resume of references and impedes them from accessing high quality employment. Lack of legal immigration status and language barriers also serve as barriers to work for victims trafficking into the United States. Mhm. Because of social stigma or misinformation, victims go unidentified, misidentified, so sex trafficked children are instead treated for drug abuse, alcohol abuse, domestic violence, delinquency, teenage pregnancy, STDs, abortion. So, what is the role of technology in human trafficking? As it was described by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, traffickers have integrated technology into their business model at every stage of the process, from recruiting to exploiting victims. Many children are approached by traffickers on social media. United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime has identified two types of strategies. The first one is hunting, involving a trafficker actively pursuing a victim, typically on social media, and the second one is phishing, when perpetrators post job advertisements and wait for potential victims to respond. Technology can also have a positive use in helping to combat trafficking, such as by aiding investigations, enhancing prosecutions, raising awareness, and providing services to victims. So, what if a trafficked person consents? According to the UN Trafficking in Persons Protocol, the consent of the victim to the exploitation is irrelevant when the threat of or use of force, deception, coercion, abuse of power, or position of vulnerability is used. In the case of children, consent is irrelevant regardless of whether any means were used or not. So, how can we prevent sex trafficking? According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, sex trafficking is preventable. Efforts have focused on increasing community awareness of human trafficking and addressing exploitation after it occurs. As it was noted, more research is needed to evaluate programs and policies that help reduce factors that put people at risk in order to help prevent trafficking. Although more research is necessary, there are several strategies based on the best available evidence to prevent related forms of violence, and they may also reduce sex trafficking. States and communities could implement and evaluate efforts that encourage healthy behaviors in relationships, foster safe homes and neighborhoods, identify and address vulnerabilities during healthcare visits, reduce demand for commercial sex, and business profits from trafficking related transactions. So, in order to engage the audience and to test what they have learned, I made 5 questions for the presentation. So, the first question is, what information find you the most interesting or shocking to learn about? The second question is, what population is at highest risk for becoming victims of sex trafficking? In what 4 states does sex trafficking occur the most in the United States? Then name 2 physical and 2 mental health problems that victims of trafficking may experience. And in what way is technology negative and positive in the case of sex trafficking? And I just included my reference at the end. And thank you so much for listening.